Sup guys, Heking here, bringing you a review on the latest Star Wars movie. A Star Wars story, Rogue One. So let's just get right into it, yeah? This is going to be a spoiler review, so for anyone who wishes to avoid spoilers, and I don't see why, because this movie's been out for like, what, a week now, so yeah. I mean, I'm only doing this so I can give a more detailed, more in-depth analysis if I can, and also because, you know, everyone's pretty much seen it, so I just want to get people's thoughts on what they think, and etc, etc, and because there are people who don't mind spoilers as well, so there is that. But for those of you who haven't seen the film and you want to avoid spoilers, then, you know, stop watching this video. That said, keep in mind, this is a prequel movie to A New Hope. It's set between episode 3 and 4 and tells us the story of how a group of rebel spies ended up retrieving the plans for the Death Star. Now, if you've seen A New Hope, then you should have a good, at least decent idea of what would have happened to the majority of the characters introduced in this film. Because this movie takes place, or technically speaking, ends just hours after, you know, New Hope, before New Hope begins. So, yeah, keep that in mind. And spoiler alert, if I just spoiled the crap out of you, I apologize. I don't really. Again, I did warn you. You should stop watching from the first few seconds when I said that. Anyway, guys, let's get right into it. Let's dive into it. Did I like the movie? Yes. Do I think it's a good film? Surprisingly, yes. It's a spectacular, splendid, awesome film. It is filled to the brim with amazing, spectacular action sequences and brilliant visual effects, the likes that you've never seen before, because seriously, this movie does so many new different things that I've never seen in a Star Wars movie. And the story, for the most part, yeah, it's sort of predictable and maybe cliche, but it doesn't change the fact that it's an emotional journey. And also, what would I say? Yeah, it's pretty fun. I'd say this is one of the most fun Star Wars films I've seen in a long time, more so than The Force Awakens. Force Awakens was a decent film. It was the Star Wars movie we needed. It's not the one we deserved, but it's the one we needed, because they needed to make something that at least felt like the original trilogy, so that they could, you know, have a good reason, have a starting point, so we could have better movies like episode 8 and 9, hopefully, when they come out eventually. With that out of the way, with episode 7 out of the way, we can now go into more better territory and examine and do different new things. Hopefully. Seriously, if episode 8 ends up being a carbon sort of remake of Empire Strikes Back, that's just going to be bloody annoying. So hopefully that won't be the case. They did their mini sort of remake. Now let's get into the new good stuff. And that said, this movie actually does go into the good stuff, surprisingly, for a prequel movie. Also, another thing, the prequels, yes, I'm not a huge fan of episode 1, and I'm not a huge fan of episode 2. I did kind of grow up with the prequel movies, though, that said. And that said, I also love Revenge of the Sith. So say what you will, but I love Revenge of the Sith. And if it wasn't for the prequel movies, we wouldn't have gotten Star Wars: The Clone Wars TV show. So that's one of the biggest positives I can say, because the outcome of those films was the outcome of that. Now, let's just get into Rogue One then. Seriously, I've been talking about other movies and shit, so let's get into it. Come on, let's get into it. So, Rogue One, like I said, it's a pretty fun, action-filled, emotional ride. The best film I can properly relate it to is it's kind of Star Wars' version of Saving Private Ryan. Yeah, I know it's a big thing to say, but it kind of reminded me of that. You know, a group of ragtag kind of characters going on this journey, trying to accomplish a mission objective, and by the end, everything just goes to hell for them, but it also turns out right. So that's kind of what this film reminded me of, even though I think that movie was slightly better. Actually, it's amazing. This doesn't even compare to that, but I'm just trying to give an example here, like comparisons, a slight comparisons. And this film also reminded me of a lot of the RPGs I like to play, especially those ones where you got a different, again, group of ragtag characters, each with their own unique skill sets and characterization. And that's kind of what this film is. It introduces you to a bunch of different characters who come together in order to accomplish this one main goal. Now, the story, like I said, is about a group of rebel spies trying to steal the plans for the Death Star. It's one that we've heard many times, but it's one that we've never actually seen and how it occurred. Now, obviously, we've gotten all those side stories from back in the days from Star Wars Legends and that, but now this is obviously the expanded universe, this is the canon universe, and this is their canon version of how things actually went down. So this movie, like I said, does a lot of new things that no Star Wars movie has done. So from the very get-go, when this movie starts, it does something that no Star Wars movie has ever done, which is it doesn't start with an opening crawl. So yeah, right from the get-go, no opening crawl, which is both different and kind of annoying, because you've got the, in a galaxy in a galaxy far away, you expect that epic music, the logo, the title, and the crawl, but no, we don't even get that. I would have just preferred the title just to appear at the beginning of the film, but no, we don't get that. Instead, we get a flashback. Not a flashback, but the film does start in the past tense, which is again another thing that no Star Wars movie has ever done. So that's different and unique to it. And we do get, I think, a flashback as well. So again, another new thing. But yeah, this movie opens up in the past tense. We get introduced to Gaylor Erso and Jyn Erso and his wife Eleana Erso. Galen is obviously, he's the creator, the designer of the Death Star. He's the one who created the laser. He's the one who came up with the energy source for it and using kyber crystals and such. There's a novel, obviously, a canon novel, that's a prologue to this movie that develops the character of Erso in more detail and his relationship with the movie's main villain, Director Krennic. Now, yeah, the film starts with Director Krennic and his squad of badass looking dark stormtroopers landing on a planet to confront and take Erso with them so he can complete and finish his project on the Death Star. Shit obviously goes wrong. His wife ends up getting killed, and his daughter he sends away to hide. Obviously she witnesses the whole thing and she runs off and ends up later being taken in and rescued and taken in by the friend rebel extremist Saw Gerrera. Now Saw, if you all know, he's played by Forrest Whitaker in this movie, but Saw is actually a character from the Star Wars Clone Wars cartoon series. He appeared, I think, in one episode or two, or maybe an arc. I'm not too sure about that. It was a very forgettable, I wouldn't even say forgettable, it's just I'm not that familiar. I mean, Christ, we had 6 seasons of that show and there was a lot of things happened in that show, so forgive me if I don't remember every single detail here. But yeah, this is a character from the Clone Wars, and this is the first time that they're using a character specifically from the cartoon show, and for us, they're connecting to that show and making it officially 100% canon. And now we already knew it was canon, but for them to do this just solidifies that even more. And this character, the character of Saw, is also going to be appearing in Star Wars Rebels. And yeah, for anyone who's a fan of Rebels, you do get 1 or 2, I'd say 3 references to Star Wars Rebels in this movie if you pay very close attention, because it's very hit and miss. But in a recent interview, it was confirmed that yeah, those are actually references to the Rebel TV series. So again, that's canon as well. So we got our little tie-ins there, even though they're quick and blink and you miss it. But yeah, we get introduced to Jyn, whose family, whose mother gets killed by Krennic, and whose father gets basically kidnapped. He gets taken away, forced to work on this project, and she ends up growing up with Saw. Now from then on, the film pretty much cuts to her as an adult, and we basically cut to the present. She's an adult now, and she's in a jail cell, and we don't know what has happened between the point when she met with him to now. We do get a little references here that she was obviously part of his extremist group and that he raised her and trained her, but we don't actually see it, and that's one of my nitpicks with this movie. We get introduced to characters in this movie and we are told things that we don't actually see. I'm always the type of person who's for, show and don't tell, but this movie decides to tell you instead of showing you, and that kind of ifs me about in the wrong way, because you can't really form a strong emotional attachment with some of these characters unless they really explain to you what the hell's going on. For example, when it starts cutting back and forth from Jin and introducing the various characters you are going to be presented to, you are introduced to this one specific character who says that, you know, this happened and he did this. And yeah, for the most part, I didn't get attached to this character. Not a whole lot anyway. I liked him for, you know, for how he's played in that, but you don't really get a lot out of it. But yeah, I'll go into that with more detail as I explain everything that's going on. So yeah, Jin's in prison. She's done some shit. She's been captured by the Imperial troopers, you know, the Empire, etc., etc. And we cut to our next main character, who's called Cassian. Now, Cassian is a rebel agent and a rebel spy, etc., etc. And he's meeting with one of his informants, who was also part of the Rebel Alliance. Now, obviously, shit goes wrong, and they end up getting caught by Imperial troops, and they end up getting killed. The Imperial troops, by the way. And since Cassian's informant cannot get out of, you know, cannot escape, and he's starting to panic, Cassian ends up killing him. And for the first time, we are introduced to this grey area in the Rebel Alliance. I mean, because you know, when you watch the original trilogy, you pretty much know who the good guys and bad guys are. The Empire's bad, the Rebels are good. But this is the first time that we sort of see the Rebel Alliance in a very negative light. It's something we've never seen before, and this movie sort of at least explores the more darker depths that the Rebel Alliance goes into trying to achieve its goals, and you know how not very different they are from the Empire. So that was a very unique and different thing we've never even seen. It's very dark as well, and speaking of dark, I have to say this is one of the more darker Star Wars movies. You look at the original trilogy, and yeah, you've got A New Hope and Return of the Jedi, and yeah, a lot of people will say Empire is the darkest one, but really, Empire is not really that dark. A lot doesn't happen in that film until like the last 20 minutes, and so. But for, you know, everyone always goes on, it's serious, it's dark. It's not really that dark. Revenge of the Sith, in my opinion, was a lot darker because, you know, a lot of characters got killed. You had the freaking scene where freaking Anakin gets burned to a freaking crisp. Padme dies. Jedis get murdered, shot in the back. I mean, shit goes really down in that film. So I feel like, really, Sith is the darkest one. But then this movie came out, and you know, that just blew it out of proportion, because you got people you got innocent people just getting blasted, killed. You've got rebels shooting other rebels just trying to kill some Imperial troopers. It's crazy. You've got, you know, the ending in this movie is really dark, really dark, and yet very hopeful. But yeah, that doesn't change the fact that it's very brutal, like really brutal, I'd say. Like the shit that happens in some of the action sequences is barbaric, I'd say. Yeah, very barbaric. So that said, this movie is really dark in tone, and I'd say it's up there with being one of the darkest Star Wars movies. Is it the best one though? Well, that's something you're gonna have to decide for yourself. We then cut to the character of Bodhi, who I was talking about earlier. Now, Bodhi, he is an Imperial pilot who has defected and who has information from Galen Erso. He's gotten this information from him. He's defected and he's gone to see Saw, and he gets captured by Saw's men and he gets taken to him. Now, right off the bat, his character. What can I say? Let's just say this. There's a sequence very early on in the movie of him, obviously, when he's getting introduced to Saw, and then later on we come back to him and he's getting tentacle mind raped by, yeah, a giant octopus. I don't know why that scene was in there. I don't know what it is with Star Wars and its fetish for tentacle monsters. Force Awakens had that sequence with the rolling tentacle monsters, and on one hand, obviously we needed a scene where the heroes, you know, show off and escape in a cool fashion, but in the end of the day, it felt like filler to me. Unless this is going to be something that's going to be brought up in episode 8, for me it was a pointless scene to have in the film. Just like this is pointless to have. The only difference being that lasted about 5 minutes, this lasts about a minute, and it's cringe-worthy as hell because the effects in this are so freaking obvious. And it's never really referenced or gone back to. It's unneeded and unnecessary, and God knows why the hell it was in there. And yeah. One negative for this movie because of a tentacle monster mind raping one of the characters for no reason because Saw is a lunatic. And I get they're trying to show that, but it was unnecessary. We already saw how deranged and unstable he was. There was no need for this scene. But what can I say? Tentacle fetish. If you like it, you'll enjoy that scene. So yeah, as I was saying about Bodhi's character, yeah, I kind of compared him to Finn from Force Awakens. The only difference is that at least with Finn, we got to see why he would defect from the First Order, and we saw his journey in trying to redeem himself and become a better person. With Bodhi, obviously by the end of the movie, he plays his part and he is a good guy, but we don't necessarily see why he would want to defect, and we don't really see the relationship we had with Galen Erso, who he clearly is somewhat close with, because there obviously was some sort of friendship there, but we don't see it. It would have been nice to maybe to have a scene set that up beforehand, but we don't get that, and that's one of the problems with this movie's first act. There's a lot of stuff it throws at us, and some of it works and some of it clearly doesn't, especially this beginning stuff with Bodhi and Saw, which just, you know, it just feels very forced, if you will. It's just something there to move the plot along, and it doesn't have the oomph that it needs. We obviously then cut back to Jyn. She gets rescued by Cassium and his droid played by Alan Tudyk, K2, who is hands down properly the best character in the movie. I mean, this droid, you know, the same way that BB-8 was kind of like the cute, awesome sort of version of R2-D2 in Force Awakens, K2 is the more badass, sarcastic, comedic version of C-3PO. If C-3PO wasn't a complaining dipshit all the time. Because K2 is not a dipshit, he doesn't complain, well, he does complain, but he complains in very logical ways, and it's funny, and he kicks ass, and he's awesome. So, and he's played by Alec Tudyk, again. Awesome character, like, I didn't laugh out loud, but I had a grin on my face every time he would comment or say something or just do something. It was great. Great character. I would have loved to have seen more of him. Yeah, we get introduced to those two. We then cut to the Rebel Alliance on Yavin 4, which is a nice callback to the original film. That said, like I said, there's a lot of callbacks to the original movie, because again, this is a prequel that sets up what's to come in A New Hope. There's also obviously references to other things. Like I said, you've got Saw connects to Clone Wars and eventually Rebels when we get to it. You've obviously got the little Rebel references in there already. You've got some other references like this, you know, the Kyber crystals being used to create the Death Star laser. So that's great. A lot of little references in that if you're a hardcore Star Wars fan. And me being the Star Wars fan I loved all of those references. But not all the cameos. We do get cameos. Some that are, you know, random and unexpected, which work, and some that are like, I know those two, yeah, I don't really care. Like, that's kind of the reaction you're gonna get. But yeah, we get introduced to the Rebel Alliance on Yavin 4. Jyn is given a mission, and the movie pretty much kicks off from there. It starts getting good from that point on, because we then go to the planet of Jeddah where Saw and Bodhi are, and their mission is to find Bodhi and to maybe kill or get Saw on their side. And we get introduced in this planet. We get introduced to two of the most badass characters. And you know, if you love K2, then you are definitely gonna like the character of Chirrut or Iram, I think. Very hard to say. Chirrut, I think it's his name. Played by Danny Yen, I think. And yeah, brilliant freaking character. He doesn't get a lot to do. He's sort of basically the blind, wise sage who believes in the Force. He's basically a guardsman at the time when, you know, there were still Jedi around, and, you know, he's guarding the temple that's still there or destroyed. And at the same time, he's got his friend there who's, I think, also a previous temple guard or turned assassin. His name is Baze, obviously, and you know, them two, they're pretty much tied. We don't get a lot of backstory with them, which is a shame, because I would have loved for this movie to delve into these characters more. Like, every time they appeared on screen, they just, you know, they got a laugh and grin at me, because they would do something funny or badass. These two, along with K2, in my opinion, are the best characters in the movie, because they're the most interesting and you want to see more of them, and sadly you don't get a whole lot of that, especially with Chirrut's character, because, you know, he's basically the Jedi of the movie. Even though he doesn't have a lightsaber, he's the one that believes in the Force and does those prayers all the time. He's the believer of the group, he's the wise one. And then of course you've got his friend who's not a believer anymore. He's obviously lost things in his past, and he's now a non-believer. He's not as devoted as he once was. And obviously the whole point of his character arc is that by the end, he's obviously going to find that belief again, and he's going to play his part the same way that every character in this movie plays his part. Now, as I said, we get introduced to these guys, and they're fun, they're badass, and we pretty much get our first action sequence of this movie between Saw's rebel extremist, Jin, Cassian, Chirrut, Baze, K9 against the Imperials. Like, it's a great freaking sequence. It's pretty much warfare, urban warfare at its best, and it's something we've never seen in a Star Wars film. We've never seen fights like this, like in a tight, narrow, open kind of like street, and having the walkers coming and firing and things just exploding, civilians getting in the way, civilians getting shot, and Jin just being a badass like she is. I mean, you'd think a lot of the characters wouldn't get their moments in this, but they do. She gets her moment. Cassian gets his brutal moment where he ends up shooting an extremist who's on their side technically, and he ends up using this dude to blow up, he ends up using him as a suicide bomber to blow up a bunch of Imperials, which kind of makes him come across as a heartless prick, though he did it really to save Jin's life. So it's kind of a, it's kind of a very grey area, and that's one of the things I like about this movie. It kind of shows the Rebel Alliance in a very grey manner, and his character, in my opinion, is interesting because of that. So that's great to see. And of course, we get introduced to Danny Yin's character here, where he shows how badass he can be, and it's great. And same with Baze, like, brilliant action sequence, and one of the best when it comes to the action sequences. This movie just nails it. It hits it on the door. After the sequence, our characters get captured, get taken to Saw, and we pretty much get this emotional moment where Jin sort of reunites with Saw and her father, where she gets the message from her dad, and yeah, we get an answer basically to this thing that every Star Wars fan has nitpicked to death in like the last 40-50 years, which is basically, the weakness of the Death Star. As you all know, the Death Star ends up getting blown apart because of an open vent. Now, this movie and this scene in particular pretty much explains why that exists. A reason is given as to why that happens. And that is fun. That is brilliant. And it's something I always said myself, maybe it's something that the designer did. And now we obviously get an answer to that because, yeah, it's just a fun little tie-in to that. It all makes sense. After the sequence, obviously, after this emotional reunion, shit starts to go down where we finally get introduced to the Death Star itself. Now, if there's one thing that sort of pissed me off about the original movie is the fact we only ever really see the Death Star fire once. Blow up one planet and that's it. With this movie, we get treated to basically levels of tests by the Death Star. Like, technically speaking, this is the first planet that actually gets destroyed. Well, not the planet, but the area in general. And what happens is that we also get introduced to Tarkin here. More about that later. But yeah, we pretty much get an initial test of the Death Star here, and we get to see what happens when a low-powered shot from the laser is fired instead of the fully powered shot that we get, for example, in New Hope when it ends up destroying Alderaan. Here, we actually sort of see what happens to a planet when it's shot by a low power, and what the resulting disaster is. And what the result disaster is it's like an earthquake tsunami. I mean, it's insane. This, again, second action sequence of the film already, it's badass. Like, it's badass. You got all the characters escaping, making their escape on the ship, and you've got the whole ground and canyon, whatever, just ripping up from the ground and coming and bending in. It's like something out of Inception, but like a million times more insane. Like, this is what I have to say. This is something that I've never seen in a Star Wars movie before, and it's great to see that. It's great to witness that. I mean, I was on the edge of my seat watching this happen. I'm like, holy shit, I have never seen something so freaking awesome and cool in my life. And it just goes to show how, out of his way Gareth Edwards, for example, went into trying to give us something new, different, and yet nostalgic at the same time. I mean, this movie pretty much succeeds in giving us new different worlds, new different ways of action and stuff that Force Awakens, in my opinion, failed on. As much as I like Force Awakens for the way it's filmed and that, in terms of story structure and characters, it isn't done as well, especially action sequences. When it came to the action, really. The only part I really liked was maybe the beginning and the Millennium Falcon chase. Other than that, I wasn't a big fan of the way the action was done, and that's a shame because, you know, J.J. Abrams, he gave us the first 2 Star Trek reboot movies, and I thought the action in those 2 films was a million times better than anything we got in Force Awakens. I mean, this is the guy who said that, you know, Star Trek should be like Star Wars, it should be fast-paced and shit, and yet we get a Star Wars movie from him and it's slow as crap. And pretty much a beat for beat of A New Hope as well. But this movie, man, this movie goes out of its way to give us something new and different and insane, and it's so freaking cool to see that, to witness that. Like, damn. It's really fast paced because it does start off slow at the beginning. The first sort of 20-30 minutes is really slow, but you can forgive that because of it having to introduce the story and the characters first. You do get some dodgy moments, like I said, with Saw and Bodhi at the beginning, but once those are out of the way and it starts getting into it, it really grips you and it doesn't let go, and you're on your edge of your seat 24/7 because the action sequences are so great, the character chemistry, the humor is great, and yeah, man, it just keeps on going and going and ups itself every single time. And then of course, you get to the 3rd act, and yeah, shit starts to go insane. You ever wanted to see a Star Wars movie, like literally Star Wars? You see Star Wars, and yeah, it's great. We finally get that sort of quality, that level of Empire versus Rebel War that we sort of been asking for years. Because like you watch the original trilogy and you don't really get that. The way this film does, that final act, man, it cuts to the ground on Scarif with the rebels fighting, the forces there. It cuts to the space battle above. Like it is just like, please, I mean, seriously, it's pleasing as hell. For a Star Wars fan, this is pretty much all we ever wanted to see. We just wanted to see utter chaos, and we do, and it's breathtaking. Every second of it is breathtaking. To get this kind of speed, this kind of high, like the energy you get from it, the energy you see in this entire action sequence, in this entire final act, just blows anything that we really got to see in any other movies from time to time. I mean, like I said, if I've had to compare this to Force Awakens, it definitely blows that out of the water. Like, it's just awesome. That's all I really can say. The visual effects for this entire space battle and the ground battle are awesome. How it all starts off being sneaky and suddenly all hell just breaks loose. Like, it's great. And then of course, the emotional side of this movie, which is pretty much the death of every single of the main characters in this movie, which is just surprising. Because this being a Disney movie in a way, you'd think that, you know, they wouldn't have the balls to go through with this, but they did. And for us, we get a very emotional, messed up, brutal ending in where everyone dies. And this is one of the reasons why I compared this to Saving Private Ryan. Because like that movie where suddenly everyone starts getting killed off one by one, beat by beat, you get that same here. Every character has their moment, their big moment where they all play a role in getting these plans to the Rebel Alliance, and they all get killed afterwards, and it's sad. It's really sad. And I know a lot of people are probably going to argue and complain saying, well, we didn't really know these characters, and I get that. We don't spend a lot of time with some of these characters, especially with Chirrut, Baze, and Bodhi. But like, we spent a lot of time with Jyn, with Cassian, with K2, and they're good. They're maybe not as interesting, but they're good. And still, those characters, they're good in their own way. And it still hits you in the heart, in the feels, because you don't want to see these characters die. You do kind of want to spend more time with them, and when they die, it's just like, it leaves you with a very empty, depressing feeling. And I think that's great, because that's something, again, a lot of movies fail to deliver on sometimes when you get a death sequence. Especially, you know, when you watch a war film, like you watch something like Transformers, for example, and you don't get that impact when people die. Here you do, and it works, and it's done well, and it's justified, and it's great. It's freaking great. I know I keep saying that, but it really is. Like, I had tears in my, well, maybe not tears, I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I probably will when I end up getting the Blu-ray and watching this in my own private time. I will be crying then. So yeah, negatives about this film, the CGI faces. Holy shit. Holy shit. Again, I'm getting a mixed bag on this. A lot of people are saying, oh, it's good, it works. And a lot of people are saying, no, it's pretty terrible. Now, here's the thing. Unless you're very good at noticing obvious CGI, then you might love this. You might like what they do with Tarkin, because Tarkin is in this movie and he basically looks and sounds like Peter Cushing from the original movie. They get the mannerisms and the attitude down right, and it's great to see that character. What's not great is when you're looking at him and you're like, this is a special effect. I'm looking at a CGI character face, and it's really off-putting when it should be, it's distracting as hell. And this isn't the only CGI character you see like this. You end up seeing at the very end of the movie, the last thing you see at the end of the film is Princess Leia. And yeah, on one hand that was kind of good, but the moment she started talking and sort of moving her eyes, it became very noticeable very quick, and it just kind of like, ugh. It's like, damn, but thank God that only lasts for like 10 seconds. Tarkin is in this movie a lot. And on one hand, you know, when he's standing and not moving, it looks great. The moment he starts talking and shit, it's very noticeable. Especially when you've got a real actor standing next to him, and you can kind of see the difference in sort of light tone and skin tone. Like, you can tell it's CGI. A lot of people say it's good, but I don't see how you can say that. It's not. It's really not that. It's terrible. It's freaking terrible, and it really puts you off from those scenes. And it confuses me why they didn't just get a lookalike or prosthetics. I mean, I'm sure as hell that works. I know for a fact it works. I know for a fact you can use good makeup and make people look like dead people. But Vader is a cameo. He is a cameo. He only has 4 minutes of screen time, and he's only got 2 scenes. But my God, those are some good 2 scenes. His first scene is Krennic pretty much going to, which is actually surprising. This is a planet that does not end up getting named. Every other planet we go to has at least a calling card, but with this planet we don't, and that's because as a fan you should recognize it, and that's because it's Mustafar. Vader has his castle built on Mustafar, and we see how Vader pretty much spends his time when he's not in the suit. We see him in these deformed glory in Vader tank. And yeah, it's kind of a shame they didn't get Hayden Christensen, maybe just a cameo for this one sequence. It would have been great just to see his burnt up, shriveled face. But like, yeah, overall great scene. The moment when he's choking Krennic basically, and he gives him that cheesy but awesome line, "Be careful not to choke on your aspirations, director." Yeah, that's freaking badass, man. That's Vader all the way. And at that point I thought, that's it. We're not going to get any more Vader scenes. If we do, it's probably just going to be another talking scene. But no. Vader was the most surprising thing about this movie, because his final scene is hands down glorious. It's probably hands down one of the best Star Wars sequences we've ever gotten. Now, forget what I've just said about the final battle that we get here. This one sequence, which is I think 1 minute in length, blows a lot of other scenes that we've ever gotten in the prequels or original films out the water. Because here, for 1 minute, we see Vader kicking ass like he's never kicked ass before, and it's a great scene. Like, this isn't even an action scene. It's a horror show. That's what it is. It shows Vader in the most horrific possible way, and it's great. Which is kind of disappointing that that's really all we get of him. And why I would have wished we would have gotten more of Vader instead of Tarkin, because god damn it, they nailed it. They nailed it on their head with just those 2 scenes alone, and that one scene, that last scene alone in the end of the movie. Like, I just would have wished we'd gotten just more Vader to build that scene up, because it's such a great unexpected scene. I mean, I was in awe. I didn't expect to see that, and because I honestly thought it was going to cut to black and that was it. But no, it didn't. We got the action here, and it was terrific. Terrific. Well done, Gareth Edwards. Well done. You delivered. Now, give us a Darth Vader standalone movie, because, yeah, you've shown that it's possible to do it. Because people will love it, and I certainly did. The villain, Director Krennic. As I've already said, there's a relationship between Gail Orso and him that's really not fleshed out in the movie. And it's a shame not to get that, because his character he's just sort of there. He's meant to be the dude who, you know, he pressed forward the project of the Death Star, and it ends up getting taken over by Tarkin. And Vader doesn't give a shit either. Like, he treats him like shit. Tarkin treats him like shit. He's basically everyone's bitch. And instead of being the villain that you hate, or a villain that you love to hate, or that you just love, you just kind of feel sorry for him. Like, he's just pathetic. Like, the actor, like, he does a lot of good. I mean, his scenes are good, and he gives a good performance, but his overall character arc is just pathetic. Like, that's what he is. He's just a pathetic character. He starts off strong in the beginning, and then he just comes crashing down, which is a shame because I would have loved for his demise, his final confrontation with Jin, and his demise to go out in a better way than it did. And that's really sad, especially when you consider the fact that Jin's father and he were meant to be best friends at a time, and it's sad not to get a repercussion or some sort of development between that, with him realizing that that's his friend's daughter. Like, it's just sad we don't get anything like that. He's just an asshole trying to be the best, and he ends up being swept under the rug. That's basically his character. And yeah, that's one positive thing I can say about Force Awakens, is that at least the villain, Kylo Ren, was better than Krennic in this film. So, you know, sad times. But everything else, in my opinion, just works well. This is a Star Wars movie through and through. At times it doesn't even feel like one, mostly because it doesn't have a huge focus on the Force or the Jedi and the Sith or lightsaber battles. This is a movie that feels very realistic, brutal and dirty. And speaking of dirt, you know, when you see those stormtroopers and they got smudges and dirt on them and just marks, it's great to see that, because it just kind of shows you the realistic kind of look you'd have in a war. Like, when you're in a war, everything is just shit. That's what it is, and you kind of get that here, and it's great. It's great. It's just a sense of realism that you don't get in a lot of films, especially with the prequels. I know I'm kind of bitching here, but I think that's something everyone's always said. You don't get that feeling of realism from the prequels, and you get it here, because in the end of the day, this is a war movie, and you get that harsh reality of a war film with, you know, both sides playing their hands and their cards, and both sides being conniving and evil in their own way, and it's great to see that. Like I said, I've already given my nitpicks and my negatives. I just wish this film was slightly longer in the character development department. I just would have liked to have seen more scenes with Chirrut and Baze, and with Bodhi and K9 and Galen, because everything else was just great. The action sequences are great. The visual effects, you know, when they're not CGI faces, are great. Darth Vader, even though he's short, you know, as they say, less is more. He's great. Felicity Jones as Jin, you know, a lot of people complained that maybe she wouldn't sell the role, but she did. She was a very strong character, and not just a strong female character. Like, to be honest, she's kind of a weak female character, really, but she's human. I will say this, she's human. She doesn't come across as a sort of Mary Sue that Rey came across in Episode 7. I like Rey, don't get me wrong, I like Rey, and hopefully Episode 8 will do it better. I love the characters, but I think I kind of prefer Jin here a bit more, at least a bit. That said, her character wasn't as interesting as the other characters. I thought those characters were a lot more interesting than her, sadly, but her performance was great. Everyone else's performance was great. Everyone does a good job. There is no negatives or bad sides here. Everyone plays a role, everyone has their moments, and overall it's a very satisfying movie with a good conclusion, probably even great ending. And yeah, that's really all I can say. I like this movie. What will I give it out of? 8 out of 10. I'll give it an 8 out of 10. Definitely a very good, strong film, especially a very good, strong Star Wars movie. So yeah, there you have it. And yeah, I do think it's better than The Force Awakens. I really do. And hopefully this movie is proof that the next anthology films will be great, though still it's Han Solo and Boba Fett. Like, maybe you might want to think about changing those titles, guys, because I am still not convinced. Anyway, guys, as always, like and subscribe, whatever, and I shall see you when I shall see you. Take care and bye.